I just want to start, if I may, with Sudan, because there's going to be lots of our viewers who are going to be very concerned about the situation there. France already beginning to evacuate its citizens. It didn't feel like, from that interview with Oliver Dowden, that the government in the UK has any plans to do so. He said that we simply don't have the scale of resources on the ground in Sudan as we did in Afghanistan. Would that be a mistake?
Well, it's deeply concerning what we're hearing from Sudan, and I'm very fortunate as a Leicester MP to represent a small Sudanese community. I know people are deeply, deeply troubled and alarmed at what they're seeing and what we're hearing from Sudan. As to the question around evacuations and so on, it does seem a legitimate question as to why our government is not acting in the same way that other governments are acting. I hope we can have a clarification from the Foreign Office, perhaps in Parliament, in the coming days on that front.
Well, we'll wait and see what that does, whether they do that. As Mr Dowden said, it's a very fast-moving situation on the ground in Sudan. We were also talking about the illegal migration bill that is due to come to the House of Commons next week. Just to clarify, how is Labour going to be voting on that?
Well, of course, we don't think that this illegal migration bill is going to resolve the problems, although we have put down amendments around those who have come to the UK via the Channel crossings and are terror suspects. We believe there should be a duty upon the Home Secretary to find those terror suspects and deport them immediately. So we'll be interested to see if Conservative MPs vote for our amendment. But more broadly, of course, we don't think this legislation is going to fix the problem. To fix the problem, you really have to go after these criminal gangs and people smugglers. You need to have a very specialist agency, properly resourced. That is something that Yvette Cooper has been pushing for. But of course, we want to deal with these people traffickers who are bringing people across the Channel because at the moment they're getting away with it, and that is not right.
Of course, no one's been actually deported to Rwanda yet because it's been snarled up in the courts so far. And what was very clear from Oliver Dowden this morning was that there is going to be new powers given to the Home Secretary to ignore what he would say last-minute requests from the European Court to try and stop deportation flights. Does Labour think it's acceptable for European courts to be able to overrule decisions made in the UK?
Well, of course, the Home Secretary has sent more journalists to Rwanda than actual migrants. It's not a scheme that is going to work. It's why we've said we shouldn't be going ahead with that scheme, and we should be using the money that would be saved from that, and millions and millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money has already been spent on this scheme.
Though, if I may, the specific question was about
no, we should always follow.
European
we should always follow the law. Well, of course, we should always follow the law. We shouldn't be acting outside of the law. But the point is that scheme is not working quite self-evidently because, as I say, the Home Secretary has actually sent more journalists to Rwanda, and we should use the resources that have been ploughed into that scheme to invest in a specialist crime agency to really go after these criminal people trafficking gangs. I've seen very senior Tory MPs tweet, there'll always be these criminal gangs, there'll always be people traffickers, why go after them? I think that is just unbelievable to give these criminals a free pass. Labour would get tough and would deal with these criminal gangs.
I guess the difficulty is, saying that you'll get tough and saying that you'll deal with the gangs, that's the easy bit. It's pretty difficult, isn't it, to actually prosecute or even find the people traffickers. What the government would argue is that at least they're trying to do something. What is Labour's plan other than to smash the gangs? Which sounds easy, but is much more difficult in practice.
But we're prepared to put the resources into a specialist criminal police investigatory force to deal with our international allies. The Conservatives say they're trying to deal with it. Well, what have they done? They're not doing anything. And actually, we keep getting press releases and op-eds from ministers and Tory cabinet ministers parading around studios saying they're dealing with this. And actually, they never do. They're more interested in grabbing headlines than actually dealing with the problems on the ground. We've got a plan. We'd start by going after those criminal gangs with our specialist police force. We'd also deal with the backlog in the asylum system as well, because there's a huge backlog in claims. What are the government doing in response? They just chase headlines week after week.
Right, let's look, shall we, at the other big story of the week, which is the resignation of Dominic Raab after that report into his behaviour at the Ministry of Justice and also at the Foreign Office. Now, he has said that he believes that some civil servants were effectively out to get him, that they were, in his words, activists who were trying to block reforms. How concerned should we be that a senior minister is saying this about the civil service?
Well, look, first of all, let me say this. There's no problem with being demanding or inquisitorial or pushing the system hard. I want to be the Work and Pension Secretary. I want to be demanding and push the system to get people into good, well-paid jobs, to lift children out of poverty, to help the disabled people, 1 million extra disabled people in poverty. I want to push hard and be demanding to give pensioners security. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the report found that Dominic Raab was intimidating, aggressive, and it's not just that he was a bullying minister, he was also a failing minister, failing to deal with the backlog in the courts, failing to deal with the problems in the criminal justice system, and indeed his failures with the criminal justice system, I think, are symptomatic of a failing government who, after 13 years now, all of our public services are on their knees and failing. So look, it's right that Dominic Raab has resigned. It calls into question Rishi Sunak's judgement in appointing him, and I think it's now the third cabinet minister he's lost. So there is a serious questions about as to why Rishi Sunak appointed him in the first place. But my biggest concern is the failing ministers and their failure in government.
I just wonder, do you think we're at a bit of a watershed moment when it comes to workplace culture? I remember a very, senior Labour politician in years gone by who people said they'd witnessed him throwing pens, staplers, shoving a printer off a desk. Things just, and obviously it's worth saying that none of this was at all directed towards Dominic Raab. But do you think our standard for what is acceptable in the workplace has changed?
People should not feel intimidated. People should not be bullied. People should not be treated in a way in which humiliates them in the workplace. But there are many, many ministers in this government who don't have complaints about them. So it is possible to be a government minister and not bully your staff. But as I say, there is nothing wrong with being demanding. I will be demanding, if I'm the Work and Pension Secretary, to get people into good, well-paid jobs and lift children out of poverty. So it's right to be demanding when you're serving the British public. But my biggest concern here isn't just that we have a bullying minister, we also have failing ministers. And, we've got a government which is failing across the board, not just on public services, but a government that is putting up tax on working people, that is forcing people or leaving people abandoned without the help that they need within this desperate cost of living crisis. And of course, the biggest failure of all was when they crashed the economy last year and millions of families are now paying more for their mortgages or in rent. So we've got a government which is forcing the British public to pay the price for their 13 years of failure.
Well, that's your pitch, I guess, isn't it? The local elections, we just heard you give it there. I'm sure the government would question some of what you are saying there. It's a test for Keir Starmer, isn't it, these set of local elections coming up. If he wants to be the next Prime Minister, he needs to show that he can turn the poll lead that he has into actual seats at a proper poll. What would be a good night for Labour?
Well, look, I'm not a psophologist, and nor am I going to offer...
Yeah, but you've been around the block a bit. You know how these elections work. Come on.
I've certainly been around a long time, and you'll also know that politicians who've been around a long time don't make predictions ahead of the election because the only polls are the ones on polling day. But what I would say is this. What we're seeing from the government is a sort of last-gasp government who cannot be trusted with the future nor make amends for their 13 years of failure. They cannot be trusted on tax. They cannot be trusted on living standards. They cannot be trusted with people's mortgages, and they most certainly cannot be trusted with the criminal justice system and the National Health Service. And as I go around the country talking to people, I have a sense that people have had enough of the Conservatives and their 13 years of failure.